Hi, hi everyone. Um, I'm Henry Head. This is Kate Dolgenos, and we're the business directors for the Claremont Journal of Law and Public Policy. These are our debaters, by the way, coming up to the stage. We'd like to thank again the ATH for hosting us. Thank you all for coming, and thanks most of all for the debaters for coming and debating for their candidates. It's a really important event for us, and so we really appreciate them coming. Tonight's format has time sections, including the economy, foreign policy, domestic policy, and then at the end, an audience question section. So if you have any questions, save them to the end, and you'll be able to ask them. Each candidate has 1 minute to answer the questions posed. At the end, there will be 30 seconds to respond if they were mentioned by another candidate, but timing is up to our discretion. Before we start, a disclaimer. This is a student debate of presidential policies. The statements made by the students tonight do not necessarily represent their personal views, so keep that in mind. So with that, let's begin with opening statements from each candidate, and they'll have 1 minute each. Please introduce yourself, whom you represent, and let's start with Shayok and Secretary Clinton.
Oh, is it working? Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Shayok Chakraborty. I'm a Pomona sophomore. I'm Hillary Clinton advocate for today. So I'd just like to frame the debate, and in terms of really what we're talking about is who's going to make the best president of the United States. And we've got to talk about what makes a good president in the first place. I think if you look at history, you find there's really two qualities you need. One is effectiveness. You've got to be able to pass your agenda. You've got to be able to get what you want to get done. And the second thing is you've got to have a sense of morality. You've got to have a vision, a policy agenda that really helps all Americans and takes down barriers to opportunity and does not build up injustice, rather takes it down. And when you look at Hillary Clinton's record, you look at what she advocates for, her traits, she really does have the pragmatism, the experience, and the principles to combine all of those traits and be a really, really successful president, especially compared to the other candidates, as I'll try to prove today. So I urge the strongest support for Hillary Clinton. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayok. John?
Hi, my name is John Nicolau. I'm a sophomore at Claremont McKenna College, and I'll be representing Trump tonight. So thank you to the moderators. America is not what it used to be. People are not better off than they were 8 years ago because of failed Obama-Clinton policies. Our trade deals are a mess, our streets are not safe, our borders are open, and the Middle East is in chaos. No one wants to do business in America, and people are suffering because of it. Trump presidency would effectively change all this. The U.S. would lead by strength internationally, reevaluating its alliances and protecting its interests. Domestically, President Trump would rebuild our cities, economy, and our borders to make America great again. This election is fundamentally about the direction of our country, and Trump wants our country and its people to return to greatness and prosperity.
Thank you. Next we'll have Daniel for Gary Johnson.
Bad idea number 1, the inflatable dartboard. Bad idea number 2, inviting your parents to no regrets. Bad idea number 3, missing out on the opportunity to vote for Gary Johnson for president. Gary Johnson is the only candidate who believes in a strong limited government, brings experience, yet ethics, and brings a host of sound policy decisions that will make America a force to be reckoned with both internationally while respecting the integrity and autonomy of nations abroad. Gary Johnson is the candidate who will best further your interests, and it's why, due to his beliefs that you should have the right to do what you want with your own body in the privacy of your own home, while respecting the integrity and autonomy of the economy, Gary Johnson remains the best presidential candidate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And next we'll have Jacob for Jill Stein.
Hi, I'm Jacob Fontana. I'm a sophomore at Pomona. And I actually agree most with what the Trump supporter has to say, that this is fundamentally a question about the direction that our country is heading in. And I think we're at a turning point for a few reasons. One, we are progressively seeing the stripping away of unionization rights, of workers' rights, and the strengthening of neoliberal corporatism around the country. Second, we're seeing the increase of the military-industrial complex, more foreign interventions, more stripping away of essential American civil liberties. And lastly, we're at a turning point in terms of the environment. Catastrophic climate change is right around the corner, and the current proposals by all the candidates are insufficient to address this problem. Jill Stein is the best candidate to address all of these. She is the one candidate who has defended ending foreign intervention once and for all, the one candidate who has defended making the economy work for all of us, raising the minimum wage, putting new regulations on Wall Street, and the one candidate that has proposed what she calls the Green New Deal, a massive investment in renewable energy sources and the only true way forward to combat climate change.
Thank you very much, debaters, for those opening statements. We're going to start this debate with a general topic on the economy. And our first question for tonight is, can you please describe your candidate's plan for economic growth? Include your tax plan and whom it's intended to benefit. And we're going to start with John for Trump.
So Donald Trump's tax plan revolves around plan for the economy revolves around three essential things, which is taxation, trade, and energy. Together with policies addressing all three of those things, Trump aims to add 3.5% of GDP growth per year and an average of 20 million jobs in the next decade. As far as taxation goes, under Donald Trump's taxation plan, every income group would receive a tax cut, with the largest cuts going to the middle-class taxpayers. For example, a married couple earning $50,000 per year with 2 children would see their tax bill go down by a factor of about 35%. Comparatively, a married couple earning $5 million a year with 2 children would only see their tax bill decrease by 3%. In terms of trade, the goal of the Trump policy for trade is to ensure that all the trade agreements that the United States enters in increases our GDP growth rate and protects our manufacturing base while also aiming to reduce our trade deficit. And finally, with regards to energy, the Trump plan for the economy involves unleashing America's energy potential, which at its full capacity has the potential to add billions of dollars to our GDP per year, as well as adding over 500,000 new jobs annually, and also increasing federal and state local tax revenues by almost $6 trillion over 4 decades.
Thank you.
Daniel?
Right. So I think we're all in favor of paying less in taxes, just as a general rule of thumb. But the reason why Gary Johnson's plan for cutting tax groups for Americans across the board works especially well is because it comes with cuts to certain programs that are racking up a $20 trillion national debt. Like, it's tough love, but love for the country means that we have to, make tough choices, that we have to cut programs that, are not absolutely necessary for the perpetuation of the United States of America. So for Gary Johnson, what we see is that we see cuts across the board for each bracket, most notably for the poorest and for the middle-class Americans. And what we also see is just a general axiom that the freer the market, the freer the people, that we want to get rid of as many tariffs, as many regulations and restrictions as possible. And this kind of policy means that we encourage people to work as efficiently as possible, and that we ensure the greatest long-term strategy and long-term growth, even if it means making hard cuts in the short term.
Thank you, Daniel. Jacob?
Yes. So I think the one fundamental question about the economy is, how do we make the economy work for all of us? Jill Stein is the one candidate who has proposed something to address this. So one, we need to raise the top corporate tax rates. We have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the world. We are not effective at targeting tax havens. We do not have a speculation tax on Wall Street. All of these things can help Wall Street and large corporations pay their fair share from the benefits they have reaped from society, especially from the 2008 bailout. Furthermore, we have to have the wealthiest Americans start paying their fair share. During some of the greatest periods of economic growth in American history, for instance in the 50s, there was the highest income tax rate was around 90%. Jill Stein isn't proposing raising it that high, but right now it's around 35%, and that isn't working. So Jill Stein's proposed raising that to around 55 to 65%. And then lastly, we need a strong government investment into infrastructure. Infrastructure has one of the largest multiplier effects. It allows money to go back into circulation, allows people to have jobs, and all of those things can only be done on that sort of scale with a massive government investment, and that's why we need a plan like the Green New Deal.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Shayok.
Sorry. Okay, there we go. So Clinton's plan really is centered around the fact that the economy cannot just be about, okay, we've got a great GDP number. We've got to make sure that the money, the wealth, is actually extending to the vast majority of Americans. And when you look at her tax plan, she proposes basically raising taxes for the most wealthy among us, especially those who are millionaires above $1 million. Tax cuts for the middle class, tax cuts for the poor, tax cuts for small businesses, which undercuts this, the conservative line that the Democrats are not the pro-business, candidacy. So that's our basic tax plan. In terms of how she's going to use the extra money that she's going to be raising for us, particularly the wealthy, she's proposed a large infrastructure investment plan. She's proposed the refinancing of student debt to the tune of $35 billion. She's proposed an expansion of preschool, particularly the Head Start program, healthcare for the disabled. Basically, sorts of programs that are going to make sure that the social mobility that makes the United States truly great is restored, or at least actually extended to those who have never had it before. So that's really the focus of our plan, making sure that opportunity is there for everyone. Thank you.
Just to comment on the comments about the business tax rate, it should be noted that the Trump plan lowers the business tax rate, corporate tax rate from 35 to 15%, but perhaps the most significant part of the corporate tax rate plan presented by Trump is the one-time 10% tax repatriation that businesses would have available to them, which would allow businesses to come back to the U.S. on special conditions to relocate back to the U.S. at a lower tax rate just to get them back to the United States, which means more jobs for Americans. So I just wanted to make that point.
You, Mr. Trout.
The real surpriser on this one is that people
Quickly.
on either end of this podium expect that we can raise taxes on the rich and simultaneously beg and plead the richest Americans to keep their assets within the 50 states. Like, if you create an incentive for people to go abroad, they will. If you create an incentive for people to invest their money in foreign countries rather than in the United States, they will. There's no barrier to exit for U.S. companies under either the Clinton or the Stein plan. And if you create taxes that disincentivize people from investing their money in the United States, they will invest it elsewhere. They'll move countries. Like you see this happen with Apple going to Ireland. You see this happen countless times where because it was economically infeasible for people to stay in the country, they didn't. So raising taxes.
Thank you so much, but I think we're actually going to go on to the next section,
Sounds good.
which is immigration and refugees. So the next question is that border security and immigration reform was rated as the fourth most important issue to United States voters in a recent New York Times poll. Please describe and defend your candidate's immigration plan to address this important issue. And we will start with Daniel.
So the primary obligation of the United States government is to its own citizens first. But that said, if we can protect the citizens of other countries, I think we have a moral obligation to do so. But this obligation does not come at the expense of the security of the United States. So that said, we definitely support the bringing in of refugees into the country, but only after vetting. So there's kind of a twofold problem here, because on one hand, you have a bunch of refugees, most notably in Syria, Iraq, and the Levant in general, where people are dying daily due to airstrikes, due to military excursions, etc. On the flip side, you endanger U.S. citizens by having a blanket check and allowing anyone into the country without vetting them. So what you have to do is you have to have like an intermediate stage, like a holding area, where you keep people until they've been properly vetted. So this gets the people out of danger and protects the American security for the long term. I think the important thing to note is that refugees coming into the country right now are not terrorists, and that's something where Donald Trump and I are going to disagree. But the fact is that once people realize that they can get into the country and pose as refugees, these terrorists will expose a loophole, or will use a loophole that's meant for civilians, mostly women and children, and that is how we invite terrorists. So what you have to do is you have to make sure it's secure.
Jacob, your turn.
Yeah, okay. So I think we are a nation of immigrants, and the Stein plan really reflects that. So not only does she want to lower some of the more stringent requirements on entry. For instance, right now, refugees can take up to a year to 3 years in order to actually get into the country. And for someone who is living in destitute poverty, who is unable to have food, sometimes that is simply unacceptable. And one of the ways that you create terrorism and bring terrorists into the country is when you have large populations of refugees that moreover, that poverty is a contributing factor to the reasons why people turn to terrorism. I agree that we need to have vetting processes. I think we already have those, and those work very well. I think we need to put more investment into resources of those processes and increase the number of immigrants and refugees that we are bringing into this country.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Shauk.
So in regards to immigration, the refugees. So basically, Hillary Clinton, she vows to increase the amount of refugees that the United States takes into the country from 10,000 to 65,000. And the Pence or the Trump campaign and Mike Pence have made this out to be a huge number, but really, when you've got 2.5 million in Turkey, you've got 1.1 million in Lebanon, you've got 1.1 million in Europe. This is really negligible. And we'd like to point out the fact that this really is more than just a humanitarian issue. This is a national security issue, because if you have millions and millions, hundreds of thousands of refugees going into these countries, and particularly poorer countries in the Middle East, these governments simply cannot support that kind of a burden. And so it's up to the United States to do our part, to take in and prevent this massive national security issue, as well as the humanitarian issue that's going on. In regards to national security, I want to just make the point that it really is not a huge national security threat to take in refugees from Syria. For example, we've taken in over 700,000 refugees from Iraq and Afghanistan since 2003, and only two Iraqis were found to have actually been doing anything. They were suspected of directing funds to Al-Qaeda. Nothing violent.
We're going to move on to John's answer here. I know he has lots to say about this.
So Donald Trump's immigration plan focuses around 10 key points. However, I'm just going to focus on a few of them. So first and foremost, it involves building an impenetrable physical wall on our southern border, and ending sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants, and implementing a biometric entry and exit visa tracking system. But in general, there's an overall theme. The emphasis of Trump's immigration plan is enforcing the laws that are already in place. Trump plans on doing this by increasing the amount of people employed by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And with regard to refugees in particular, Trump shares a sentiment that what comes first and foremost is the security of the American people. And it should be noted, though, that reckless vetting has led in the past to issues. In fact, Hillary Clinton's State Department has admitted 5 refugees and 1 translator who were later charged with terrorism and related crimes. So I think it just goes to show that if a few slip through and we don't catch those few, then they could potentially have lots of troubles for the country, especially if we don't implement a system of very, very strong vetting.
Thank you very much. Shayak, if you would like to respond to that, he mentioned you. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that for number one, this idea that there's these 5 people who are suspected of terrorism. There is simply no way to achieve perfect security. If that is a goal, that's a simply naive goal. It's an idealistic goal that will never happen. So what we've got to do is look at the broader picture of security. What if Jordan collapses? They've got 10% of their population is civilian, is refugee right now. If Jordan collapses, we have a massive, even more massive refugee problem, a desperate situation in the Middle East in which more radicalization occurs. So if we're going to avert that problem, we've got to do our part. And the other thing is in regards to...
Thank you, Shayak. We're actually going to move on now. So the next question is your candidate the best to fight ISIS, and why? And we'll start with Jacob.
Okay, yes. Jill Stein is the best candidate to fight ISIS. One of the problems with current U.S. approaches to addressing ISIS is that we have created the breeding grounds for future terrorists to form by simply toppling governments in Libya. What many have proposed doing in Syria, what we have done in Iraq, have created these conditions in the first place. So the question is, how do we address ISIS now? Jill Stein has proposed an embargo on armaments, any armament shipments to Syria, and wants to work on a peace process with Assad. And doing that will allow us to refocus resources on addressing ISIS. Furthermore, one of Stein's planks of her platform calls for working with the Russians in order to address ISIS, something that the current Obama administration has done to a limited extent, but hasn't really fleshed out the full possibilities of using the Russian military and the resources the Russians have to addressing the problems.
Thank you. Shayak?
Hillary Clinton's plan, she expressly disavows ground forces. She does not want to be... No? There we go. So Hillary Clinton expressly disavows ground forces. She does not want to get into another quagmire in the Middle East the way that we have in Iraq, for example. So she supports the intensification of airstrikes. She supports the aiding of Kurds and local Arab forces. She supports the a non-military approach as well. For example, using technology to intercept jihadi websites, these kinds of things to fight ISIS. In regards to working with Russia, she does not really support that. She supports instead a no-fly zone, because really, when you look at the problem, why is it that the rebels are not able to win the war against this tyrant, this horrific tyrant named Bashar al-Assad? It's because of Russian and Syrian air power. And if the United States is going to really end the conflict and also not be seen as siding with this hated dictator, we've really got to stand up and put in a low-fly zone for not only for humanitarian reasons, but to end the war in general. Thank you.
John.
So Trump is definitely the best candidate to defeat ISIS because his plan revolves around working with our Arab allies to pursue aggressive joint coalition military operations, cut off ISIS's funding, and expand intelligence sharing and cyber warfare to disrupt their propaganda and such. But perhaps the best reason that Trump is the best candidate to fight ISIS is when you look at the alternative to Clinton's failed policies, which in large part led to the creation of ISIS. Before Clinton was Secretary of State, Libya was stable, Syria was under control, Egypt was ruled by a secular president and the ally of the United States, and Iraq and Iran were not in very menacing positions. However, after Clinton's term as Secretary of State, Libya is now in ruins at the cost of several American lives. Syria is in the midst of a disastrous civil war, and ISIS controls large parts of territory in the Middle East. So perhaps the greatest argument on why Trump is the most effective candidate to fight ISIS is his plan and also looking at the alternative.
Thank you. Daniel?
An Egyptian official once said that the United States' presence in the Middle East will never work because the United States is fundamentally too young of a country. Middle Eastern countries have existed in some way, shape, or form for thousands of years, whereas the United States is just now coming up on its 250th birthday. Every time either Stein or Clinton or Trump says, let's go in and do this, we're only exacerbating the problem. When Mr. Trump's spokesman here talks about helping Arab allies in the area, alliances shift. Remember, we backed Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran. The fact is since alliances shift and we do not understand the way that the Middle Eastern politics work adequately, we should stay out. Gary Johnson is the best candidate because he is non-interventionist. The reason so many people hate America as the great Satan is because of our hegemonic attitudes toward the Middle East. The idea that because we are the United States, we know what's best for these countries. We don't understand their cultures, their religions, their governments, their practices. The best way to prevent terrorism and to promote stability in the Middle East is non-interventionism. The only person who endorses this policy is Gary Johnson. We should vote Johnson.
Thank you very much. Before moving on to the next section about domestic terrorism, Shaq, I'd like to give you a minute to respond.
Well, two things. To the Trump claims that, well, after Clinton, after her tenure, Libya, Egypt, and Syria were in flames. First of all, Egypt was not, the idea that we could have stopped some of these things, for example, these are really a lot of Arab Spring related activities. So the idea that Hillary Clinton or anyone could have passed policies to stop these sorts of rebellions is it's farcical. No, and the other idea that Libya was stable, before Clinton had her hand in it. It was in the midst of a civil war. Gaddafi was about to go, quote, house to house, street to street in Benghazi, murdering people. This is a situation in which the United States
Thank
should.
you,
Sorry.
Thank you. We have to move on. But we're gonna move on and continue about talking about terrorism. But on the domestic side, there has been a rise of domestic terrorist attacks. Can you please highlight your candidate's plan to address the rising problem of mass shootings and domestic terror in the United States? And Shaq, you start. Yes.
So Hillary Clinton's plan, it's basically it regards intelligence, the support for the intelligence community and whatever they may need, technologically and such, as well as serious gun control, measures such as background checks, the banning of assault rifles, and an endorsement of a police approach that works with Muslim communities in the United States as opposed to attempting to antagonize them and radicalize them further, or cause radicalization by too harsh of an approach. Because we believe that basically Muslims are fundamentally loyal in the United States. Fundamentally, they are citizens just like anybody else, and Muslims are angrier than anybody at the terrorism of radical groups. So if we work with them, if we bring them into the fold, that's the answer, as opposed to locking them out, as candidates like Trump have been doing throughout the election, as they will throughout their policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John?
So Donald Trump has expressed a nuance as far as approaches to mass shootings, including identifying what the causes are of the mass shootings, and he believes that they're twofold. There's of course terroristic shootings motivated by terrorism in the sense of radical Islamic terrorism that's homegrown in the U.S. And the way to address that is stronger intelligence and monitoring online. Now, in terms of all mass shootings are considered terrorism, but as far as non-Islamic terrorist mass shootings, it's definitely a mental health question, and there needs for mental health initiatives to prevent those cases from happening in the first place. But as far as protecting the United States against mass shootings, one key policy is we need to protect our most vulnerable locations, such as schools and public places with well-armed police and such. And another point to addressing the causes, we have to really look at these communities where these people are coming out of and see what the fundamental cause of the discontent is, whether it's hatred for America or whether it's discontent stemming from economic difficulties.
Thank you. Daniel, you have a minute.
We throw around these buzz phrases like common sense legislation or mental health initiatives, but no one really agrees on what they look like. The implementation is far too controversial, and then after hours of shouting at each other, we end up right back where we started. The reason for a lot of mass shootings within the United States is anti-Americanism. People don't like our foreign policies, and they retaliate in whatever way they can. This is the reason that people who planned 9/11 cited. This is the reason why people who beheaded Nick Berg in Iran cited for terrorism against him. This is the reason for countless acts of violence against Americans, both within our soil and abroad. So with specifically looking at homegrown terrorism, we can, kind of Control-C, Control-V a lot of what I talked about earlier on terrorism. That non-interventionism is the solution in many ways to preventing anti-Americanism. But beyond that, we have to take a look at other propositions like making stricter gun laws, why those don't work. In China, there was recently a terrorist attack that was committed entirely using knife crime, and over 200 people were injured in this terrorist attack. And no
legislation
would have prevented that. The problem with homegrown terrorism is that
Thank you.
possible...
Jacob?
Yes.
Yes, so I actually largely agree about the questions of foreign intervention inciting terrorism in the U.S. But I think we can go a little bit further than that. We have used the specter of terrorism, and we never know who can possibly be a threat in the U.S. to justify stripping away of essential American civil liberties. This led to things like NSA unwarranted surveillance, unwarranted wiretapping, holding prisoners without due process at Guantanamo, and other policies similar to that. Furthermore, this has also led to one of the most egregious wars on journalism and whistleblowers that this country has ever seen. The Obama administration has imprisoned more investigative journalists and whistleblowers than every single previous administration combined. This has led to cases like people like Chelsea Manning being locked in solitary confinement for leaking documents about U.S. war crimes. So I think that when we keep focusing on this question of how can we make ourselves 100% secure from terrorism all the time, it misses the fact that a lot of the policies we have proposed to address this end up creating some of these problems in the first place or end up harming us more. Statistically, the risk of terrorism is very small, much less than things like gun crime or dying in a car accident. So I think we should reorient ourselves towards focusing on
Jacob,
more
thank you
important
so
issues.
much. Our next question is on racial issues. Over half of Americans are worried about race relations in the United States. From police and community relations to mass incarceration, what can we do as a country to address this growing issue? John, you may start.
So I think everybody agrees that there's a huge racial divide in the country, and it's definitely has not improved over the past 8 years of Obama and the policies that he was supposed to propose to fix these issues. Trump thinks that the fundamental policy that needs to be enacted is bringing jobs back to our inner cities and also improving the relationships between the police and the communities. The fundamental job of the police are to protect the communities. However, there's been a massive breakdown in the trust of the communities and the police and their ability to, or their responsibility to protect the communities. The communities don't feel protected by our police, and our inner cities are in shambles largely because of failed economic policies.
Thank you, John.
So with regards to race relations, part of the problem in mistrust with police is, in a number of cases, is that popular opinion seems to be that police act based off of racial prejudices, and that's not okay. I think part of the incentive, or part of the reason for this, is because today police officers receive quotas or assignments, if you will, where they have to send out a specific number of violations and they get paid per case that they tackle. This means that they tackle more urban areas, and since urban areas tend to be more populated with minority people, the end result ends up being that minorities are targeted more by police procedures. The solution is to take away quotas, is to make sure that police officers are truly serving and protecting us based off of their own judgments. The solution is to make sure that police officers are truly looking out for the interests of the community, not for their own paychecks. So the solution is to simply restructure the way the police system works, and then also to implement body cameras to make sure that everyone is accountable.
Thank you, Daniel. Jacob?
Yes, so I largely agree about questions of, so policing, I think, is one small facet of this larger problem. So yes, we need things like community policing. Yes, we need to work with Black Lives Matters to implement parts of those agendas. Yes, we need to demilitarize the police. But the Stein platform goes further than that. It looks towards why Black and minority communities tend to have the lowest incomes in the country, why those communities have the highest crime rates. And one of those reasons is that our economic systems in this country do not work for everyone. So Jill Stein's proposed two things. First is opening a commission to investigate the possibility and modes of implementing reparations towards descendants of former slaves. And secondly, she is in favor of implementing the Green New Deal. As I've talked about before, it's a massive infrastructure project, but a lot of this is specific programs targeted towards minority communities that allow people to get jobs and to rebuild crumbling infrastructure in the inner cities, which is very important, obviously.
Thank you very much.
Hillary Clinton supports general community policing program. She believes that the police operate with systemic racism. There is a systemic racism in the way that police in the mass incarceration system operate against minority groups. Now, so she supports better training for officers. She supports body camera. She supports the end of quotas. These sorts of methods. Now, I'd just like to point out, make a couple of attacks on the other candidates. For example, the idea that Donald Trump supports police community relations, yet he also supports stop and frisk, which is one of the least effective, most racially biased police practices out there. We have to move away from that kind of aggressive racial policing, and we have to move away from talk about just quotas and a non-racial sort of discourse. We've got to talk about the real problem. There is a race problem in this country. There's a race problem in the way that we police, and we have to move away from aggression in the way that we police minority communities. Thank you.
John, would you like to respond?
Yeah, just a short response is that stop and frisk, this Trump supporter stop and frisk is a part of a larger stance of enacting some type of common sense policy to balance both the civil rights of individuals, but also just the effectiveness of policing. Because while improving community relations and police effectiveness, we cannot go too far to the point where we make our policing ineffective. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, would you like to respond also?
Oh, yeah. Stop and frisk is completely unconstitutional. See the Fourth Amendment. It is also very much anti-minority. It is it is classist. It is every superlative you can throw at it. But I've been opposed to stop and frisk from day one. Gary Johnson has been opposed to stop and frisk from day one. The problem with stop and frisk is it destroys any element of trust between the police and between the people who are there designed to serve. So no, I think stop and frisk is a terrible policy that does more harm than good on both a constitutional and practical level.
And Jacob, I don't want to leave you out of this. Quick response before we move on to our next section.
Yeah, so I largely agree. Stop and frisk is unconstitutional and targets minority communities. I think I will add the one other thing I'll add is that Jill Stein, besides possibly Gary Johnson, is the one other candidate who has proposed addressing issues with the way that drug laws are enforced in the status quo in a fashion that overly targets minority communities. This manifests itself in things like the crack versus powder cocaine disparity, and an essential part of addressing that is addressing the way drug laws are enforced in the status quo.
Thank you very much. So our next section might be a little shorter, but is a very important issue. What is your candidate's stance on abortion in general, and for federal funding for Planned Parenthood specifically? and we're going to start with you, John.
So Trump has announced that he is pro-life, but in terms of Planned Parenthood, he's expressed that the country can't exactly completely defund Planned Parenthood because abortion isn't the only thing they do. Millions of women rely on their services for various health services. However, and also Donald Trump is pro-life, but except in special circumstances like rape and incest, where abortion is important.
Thank you for the succinct response. But the problem with abortion is it's a very nuanced issue that so many people have, strong feelings about. Like, we are, in the Johnson camp anyway, we are very much supportive of the woman's rights to choose. But we also understand that people have reservations about their tax dollars going to fund abortions. So when it comes to funding Planned Parenthood specifically, because that's the most clear vestige of tax-funded abortions, the 97% of services that Planned Parenthood funds should be subsidized by the government and taxpayers in themselves. That does not abolish the Planned Parenthood wing that does abortions. Planned Parenthood receives thousands, if not millions of dollars of donations from the private sector and can direct those funds to paying for abortions. And this brief calculations show that would more than cover whatever procedures were needed. But as far as abortion goes, the issues should be left up to the women themselves who are getting the abortion, not to people who have no stake in the fight.
Thank you, Daniel. Jacob?
Yes, Jill Stein is pro-choice, and she believes healthcare is a fundamental right of all Americans, and that includes things like abortion. I think one of the problems when we talk about defunding Planned Parenthood or redirecting tax dollars elsewhere is we don't think about who this implicates. So the people who would no longer be able to have abortions in the system are going to be the poorest Americans who maybe cannot afford abortion services right now. So this is why we need strong government funding of services like Planned Parenthood. And I think furthermore, we need like family planning services, counseling services, free contraception, because all of these things reduce the rate of abortions overall because you have less unexpected pregnancies. I think even more than that, making an economy that works for everyone creates situations where women may not feel forced due to economic reasons to seek out abortions.
Thank you. Shayo?
So I think it's well known that Clinton supports the right to choose. She supports Planned Parenthood, and she supports women's rights in general. She's been doing this for years. And I generally agree with Stein, and the support for abortion there. Just a couple of other things to take into account regarding abortion. After Roe v. Wade, there was a massive decline there's a decline in fertility, particularly among poorer and older and pregnancies, because those are the ones who basically could not support a child, but were not able to abort legally. And after that, and 20 years later, the effects of that happened in regards to the fact that the massive crime wave that was going on in the 70s and 80s declined massively. So there's a lot of different benefits to the legalization of abortion, not just the liberty issue. This is a woman's body. But the fact that it even affects crime, it affects poverty, and the fact that these people will be getting abortions anyway. It's just that if it's legal, then there's a safe way to do it. So abortion is clearly something to support on a governmental level.
Thank you. Our next question is on student issues. How is your candidate's plan specifically going to create jobs for recent college graduates? And we'll start with Daniel.
So I think the worst thing anyone can do for a prospective college graduate, and I know this is, number one on unpopular opinions, is to give people false hope. To tell people that there is, that the world outside of college is going to be, a rose garden, that there is going to necessarily be, a job and a market for every kind of skill that you might find in the college classroom. I think Marco Rubio said it best, that today is a day where we need more welders and fewer philosophers. That it's a day where, a program that erases student loans, or at least mitigates them unfairly, incentivizes people to go into fields that are simply not economically viable. And I think the toughest love, but the best love to students, to any American, is to tell them this is what you should do if you want to be viable and be successful in today's job market. And that doesn't look like absolving people of student loans. That doesn't look like incentivizing people to going into fields that are not viable. What that does look like is not perpetuating the higher education bubble that exists today. The free market needs to run its course, and intervention is simply doing more harm than good to the very people we are trying to protect.
Thank you. Jacob?
Yes. So one of the largest problems for students entering the job market is they're saddled with a massive amount of student debt. And when we look at the priorities of leaders in our country, we see that there are bailouts of trillions of dollars directed towards Wall Street, quantitative easing programs, and other programs similar to that, whereas students are neglected. So the Stein proposal calls for like wiping student debt clean, more or less. And forgiving that debt with a sort of massive government stimulus into the market. So this means that now students have money and have more options. I think furthermore, a program like the Green New Deal that invests in infrastructure development and a range of alternative energy jobs is something that allows anyone after college to be able to access the market. One of the largest problems is the lack of jobs available for undergraduates right now. And then lastly, for people who maybe cannot move immediately towards a high-paying job, Jill Stein is proposing raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which will allow people to still be able to live and still enjoy a high quality of life while they're transitioning into the like larger job market.
Thank you. Shayok?
So Clinton's philosophy regarding this is very, very diametrically opposite to the Johnson proposal, which was basically, I mean, sorry to say, it was nothing. It was basically saying, well, tough love. There's nothing we can do to, you know, student debt is a part of the natural process. Like, you know, you shouldn't be going to college anyway and getting not a good degree. But how does student debt help the economy? How is that about ballooning student debt? How would that help young people come into the marketplace and do well? That's why Hillary Clinton supports the refinancing of student debt. That's why Hillary Clinton supports the expansion of vocational training and the expansion of STEM, the STEM field in general. I mean, we're trying to train young people for the new market, and just saying, well, the free market should just you know, the free market will operate how it operates. That's not a solution for those who are left out, who are not being trained for the jobs that they need. And so that's why we need to support higher education, get rid of debt, and support people transitioning into the fields, getting the skills that they need to transition into higher paying fields.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. Trump has expressed great disgust that the federal government profits off of federal student loans. In 2013 alone, student loan programs turned a profit of over $41.3 billion, while the students who who were responsible for those loans found it very hard just to make pay basic bills. So there's various ways to fix this problem, including some type of loan forgiveness and definitely loan restructuring programs. In terms of jobs, Trump's economic plan would bring industry back to the U.S. to create jobs both with low-skilled jobs, but also high-skilled jobs. And an increase in the minimum wage wouldn't necessarily be needed there, because these jobs would be good-paying jobs, because companies would have incentives to hire Americans, and the primary incentive would be they would be back in America in the first place.
Real quick, on Hillary Clinton's statement, or Hillary's camp rather, you're not Hillary. Bill Clinton is the reason why student debt is no longer dischargeable under Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The reason why you can get out of any kind of debt except for student loan debt is thanks to Bill Clinton. So the Clinton camp claiming that they are pro-student is right up there with Santa Claus for fairy tales. No thank you, swipe left.
Shayok, you have 30 seconds.
Candidate, and they will not be pursuing the same policies. Also, I'd just like to add that the Johnson campaign also wants to do things like defund the Department of Education, which provides Pell Grants and sorts of, you know, federal aid for poor students. And so again, we see that the Johnson campaign does not stand for the kind of social mobility that we need. I don't want to make this like a catfight between us, but yeah.
Daniel, would you like to quickly defend that or no?
Absolutely. So the Department of Education has only existed since the 1970s. Like before that, like we've had public schools, public colleges long before that. I mean, Berkeley and UCLA and plenty of other schools have existed since before those days. What we want to see is them on the state level. We want to see states deciding, knowing what's best for their specific universities, because state schools come in all different shapes and sizes. They've got different demographics, different students. Having a one-size-fits-all policy is doomed to fail from its very inception. We shouldn't be surprised when such policies do fail because they're not designed to work.
Shayok, 15 seconds, and then I'm actually cutting you off.
The one-size-fits-all policy of federal aid to poor students, I mean, that really doesn't seem like, it seems like a cop-out in regards to the fact that you don't want to pay for you don't want to give the money for these kinds of students. I mean, I think that's important in order to create social mobility and opportunity and get people who are poor, who may be going on to, the sorts of government social safety nets that you don't want to be perpetuating. You want to make
we're
them
going to have to
taxpaying citizens.
cut you
wanna make
off
them
because
hard
we're going to have to
workers.
move on to the next section so we don't run out of time. We just have one more question in the domestic policy section. And it's on the Supreme Court. The next president will most likely appoint at least one, possibly two or more Supreme Court justices. What kind of judge or anyone would your candidate appoint, and why is that the best course of action? And we are starting with Daniel. Yeah.
Perfect. Turley, he is currently he's a professor of law at George Washington University. He is a candidate who is both for individual freedom and for a living constitution. He is well repudiated in every legal circle and is a choice that will seek to unify the divided court. On specific issues like healthcare, for instance, he is for the states' rights. He is for taking the Constitution and interpreting it as the Founding Fathers intended it to be interpreted, but in this modern day and era. So when it comes to, taking a hardline stance of saying that, the Constitution is what it was in 1787, we shouldn't, look at new modern issues in that light, I think is detrimental to the way that certain justices on the court or who were recently on the court and are no longer on the court might have seen the Constitution is detrimental to the American legal system and the people who reside under it.
Thank you, Daniel. Jacob.
Yeah. Okay. So Jill Stein supports electing a progressive or liberal judge to the court, someone who, with a liberal majority, will now be able to push through some liberal policies that, or at least stop the wave of conservative court rulings that have done stuff like weaken unions, weaken rights to abortion, weaken access to education, and making the country sort of not work for all of us. But I think more than that, Stein is proposing candidates who will address the way that corporatized control have taken over American politics. So this definitely includes things like reversing the Citizens United decision. And I think I'll add, because I know Hillary also supports this policy in name, but Stein is one of the few candidates who has actually has kept with the underlying notion behind the liberal defense before Citizens United that the influence of money is corrupting overall. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton has taken millions and millions of dollars from, or probably several $1 million from large businesses, claiming to not be influenced by them in any way.
Thank you. Shayok?
So Hillary Clinton really is looking for two major things in regards to her Supreme Court candidates. I mean, obviously, experience and a deep knowledge of the law, and also a clear progressive commitment. And like the Stein candidate was saying, yes, we do. We would like for a Supreme Court candidate that would not support Citizens United would want it struck down. Now, as for Hillary Clinton taking donations from large businesses, that really has not impeded upon her progressive record. Now, she has been a constant fighter. Look at her policies. She's in fact raising taxes on corporations that are trying to leave the United States. She has also all these kinds of policies that are really not super pro-business. And at the end of the day, okay, yes, we may take some money from large businesses, but we're also the leader of the race. So if you got to win, sometimes you have to play by these kinds of rules.
John?
First of all, just like to jump on the opportunity to acknowledge that the Clinton candidate just admitted that Clinton is not pro-business in any sense. But back to the Supreme Court. The Trump campaign has announced a list of over 20 conservative judges, all very conservative, all in the image of the late and great Justice Scalia. And Trump believes that we need principal originalists on the court, not judges like Secretary Clinton would nominate that would liberalize the court and produce opinions that would detrimentally affect the country in the long term.
Shayok, I'll give you very briefly respond. We want to get to audience questions soon.
It's more making the difference between being beholden to business and pro-business. Of course, we're pro-business in the sense that we're pro-growth for everybody, but we're not going to basically sell out the country to businesses, just because of because we're so loyal to them as opposed to the country as a whole.
All right, our final section is aimed actually at just Johnson and Stein, and you'll have 2 minutes each. So your candidates are polling at less than 10% nationally. Many voters see a vote for a third-party candidate as a wasted vote. Votes that go to Stein would likely go to Clinton in a two-way race, and votes going to Johnson have come out of both parties. So please tell voters why they should consider voting third party, and Jacob, will start with you.
Okay, so I think the first question here that no one really grapples with when discussing these issues is what is a wasted vote? So definitionally, a wasted vote is a vote that goes to a candidate that doesn't win, or that goes to a candidate that does win in excess of what they need to win. So for instance, in California, Hillary Clinton is polling 52 to 32 against Donald Trump. So not only does this mean that all the Donald Trump supporters would have wasted their vote, and all the third-party supporters would have wasted their votes, but also 20% of the voters who are voting for Hillary Clinton in excess of the threshold she needs to win have wasted their vote. So actually, if you look at it, the majority of votes in our country are wasted votes in the sense that they don't affect the outcome of the election. So I think that brings us to another question of what do our votes mean if they don't actually affect the outcome of the election? And for I think some people, it's an important way to sort of let your voice be heard, to demand a form of government that is what you want. And I think both of those things are important, but I think more than that, there are strategic reasons to support third-party options. So for instance, if Jill Stein reaches 5% of support nationally around the nation, the Green Party will receive $18 million of federal funding for the 2020 election. This could allow them to free up party coffers to run down ballot races, to build voter outreach infrastructure, databases, stuff like that, also to run larger campaigns in the future to attract more attention. And I think all of this sort of revitalizes a party to the left of the Democrats, which I think is good for progressive policies because it forces the Democrats to confront issues about corporate control, about militarism that they otherwise wouldn't do. But I think more than that, outside of just an ideological reason, if you're in favor of a democratic society, you want more political parties in the system. One of the reasons we have such higher voter apathy and low voter turnout in the US is because many voters don't feel like they're represented by the candidates. And having candidates that have alternative positions could better bring those people into the political process and better allow our country to work for everyone in it.
Thank you, Jacob. Daniel?
We both agree here that voting third party is not a waste of a vote, but for different reasons. My basic philosophical thesis on why voting for Johnson or Stein is not a wasted vote is this. The only wasted vote is a vote for a candidate that you don't believe in. A vote for a candidate who is unethical, a vote for a candidate with no experience, a vote for a candidate who regularly puts others down, who's had their hands caught in far too many proverbial cookie jars, who is completely unfit to be president. The stance of the Johnson campaign is that Johnson, sitting at the podium, or who should have been at the first, second, and third debates, quite frankly, is the only candidate who could effectively lead the United States. Now, from a more practical, strategic standpoint, parties are born by landmark elections all the time. The first Republican president in the United States was Abraham Lincoln, who ran as a third-party candidate. Third-party candidates can and have historically won. And in the age of social media, with communication being what it is, the time for a third-party candidate has never been greater. The flip side, however, is that most Americans, when it comes to identifying between Democrat, Republican, or independent, would actually choose to identify as independent, yet continually feel like they must choose between the lesser of two evils in order to stop this big gargantuan gargoyle, whether he is orange or is someone who is crooked. Like whichever of those makes you sleep less at night is the one you have to vote against, so you vote for the lesser of two evils. That is why voter apathy and voter anger is so high. The vote for Johnson is not a wasted vote. If you're considering voting for Johnson because you agree that people ought to be in control of their own lives, that people deserve autonomy, I challenge you to find a disgruntled voter from the other party, and then both agree to vote Johnson. Neither Hillary nor Trump gets ahead, only America. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now you're each going to have a minute for a closing statement, and then we're going to move on to audience questions. Shayo, we'll start with you.
Hello. So I urge you to vote Clinton anyway because, quite frankly, the stakes are extremely, extremely, extremely high. We know that Johnson and Stein will not win. We know that Clinton needs every vote she can get, as the polls are so volatile. And we have a true threat to the United States. We have a man who is inexperienced. His policies are extremely far right-wing and xenophobic. He's given birth to an ethnic nationalist movement that threatens our democracy. So when we look at Hillary Clinton, you look at the things that she wants to do. She has a clear commitment to opportunity for all, and a clear pragmatism and a clear experience that allows her to get her agenda passed. And so if we're thinking about who's going to be president, who's actually qualified, who's actually knows what they're going to be doing, you've just got to vote Clinton. So thank you.
Thank you, Shark. John?
So when voters go to the poll in November, the fundamental question they should ask is whether or not they're better off now than they were 8 years ago. The majority of them will most likely answer, no, I'm not better off. And that can be directly attributed to Clinton and Obama policies. A vote for Trump would be a vote for America in terms of policies that are pro-growth, international policies that are for the security of the United States, and domestic policies that are for each and every American citizen. The alternative is someone who's been there, done that, failed, and the failures of Hillary Clinton cannot be ignored to the extent of saying, well, maybe not Trump, but maybe Clinton's okay. So this election is definitely about the direction of the United States, and Trump wants to take the United States in a new direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Daniel?
So we just listened to those two candidates poop on each other, but they didn't really give you an adequate reason for why they should vote for their own candidate specifically. Whereas I believe that a vote for either of those two, Trump or Clinton, is a vote to perpetuate the binary that exists in a two-party system that only alienates the majority of American voters. A vote for Gary Johnson is a vote for personal and international autonomy. A vote that we have faith in you as a human being, that you know what is best for your life, and you ought to be the captain of your own decisions. A vote for Johnson is a belief that we have faith in other countries and know that they know what's best for their own politics, and intervention abroad will only fail. A vote for Johnson is a vote for rational politics, someone who has experience as a Republican governor of a Democratic state by partisanship, but has not had their, going back to the expression, had their hand caught in the cookie jar. That is not everything that is wrong with Washington, but is also simultaneously experienced enough to know how to get things done. That has not had so many bankruptcies and failures that they can't effectively manage a national budget. A vote for Gary Johnson is a vote for a candidate that will enact real change with the belief that people are basically good and have the capacity to direct
you,
their
Daniel.
lives. Vote Johnson.
The fundamental question this election is, how do we make our country work for everyone in the country? Not just the billionaires, not just the Wall Street stockbrokers, but everyone. And I think this starts with Stein's policies such as the Green New Deal. This starts with protecting our civil liberties. This starts by raising the minimum wage, ending corporate control, breaking up large banks. This starts by ending foreign interventions and redirecting those funds towards making programs work at home. But I would like to add that Shayok made a comment about this election is too important to lose. And I agree that a Trump candidacy would be scary. But this idea that because out of these two major parties, we have picked a candidate that we deem more evil, and now we have to vote for them or vote against them, is kind of absurd. Rarely do third parties ever swing the election in one direction or another, and never do they do it in a way where alternative factors cannot explain it as well. For instance, the 2000 election between Nader and Gore can just be as easily be explained by Gore like redirecting his strategy away from Ohio in the last few weeks than by the Nader presidency or Nader run. So I think a lot of times the major parties will try to discourage people from voting for third parties, for turning out and fighting for the type of
Jacob,
government
thank
you
you.
want.
We're going to move on to audience questions now. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand.
So for the representative of Donald Trump, I do have one question. In Trump's policies, he has pledged to decrease taxes across the board for every bracket, but he simultaneously has proposed massive spending on infrastructure, on building a wall, on many other things. And I was wondering how you can square much more national investment with less revenue coming in from taxes.
Well, I'm not sure it's necessarily less revenue. I think the policies would be defended by a revamp of our regulations and taxes across the board, and a decrease in spending in many aspects, especially when it comes to entitlement spendings and such. I think that combined with the national growth would end up reducing our deficit, or that's the goal of the policy.
thank you for very interesting presentation. Other than wondering why in reality we have 2 ladies and 2 men, and here sitting only 4 men, I shall not make it as a question, but because I had another one. To the 2 minority parties, I think it is a plausible a position to argue that, especially in a present election, there might have been a room for a third effective party. However, I shall ask you a broad question. When do you think such a party should be born? During the election, actual election, or in between elections? I understand your position of Mr.
My name is Mr. Ludlam. I'm representing the Awesome Johnson camp.
Yes, Mr. Johnson, that this is a way to get funding. But it to me appears that the funding is sort of taking the cart ahead of the horse. So that's the question.
Right, so first of all, thanks for giving me credit for Jacob's answer here. I think that was pretty dope. But second of all, I think that election season is when people care most about politics. There's huge changes in voter turnout when you look, even comparing presidential years with midterm years. Whereas every 4 years, politics becomes America's national support. It's not March Madness, it's politics. It's red states and blue states. So if you want to bring awareness to third parties, the only time where it works is when everyone's already talking about politics, when everyone's already talking about, you know, the issues, the worries that we have of whoever might win the next election, what that might bring to the United States. So when it comes time for bringing a third party in, when Abraham Lincoln won his presidential election, that happened because of a huge catalyst within the presidential election year of 1860, when the Republican Party, which was basically non-existent beforehand, it was a handful of disgruntled Whigs at the time, came in. That only happened because he caught lightning in a bottle in a presidential election year. So timing, I mean, I understand that for many people who want to vote third party, that, you know, between Hillary and Trump, I certainly am not a huge fan of either candidate, but and you might be worried about like stopping one of them from winning more than, you know, revitalizing the American political system. I get that, but this is a good a time as any. It's like, when's the best time to plant an oak tree? You know, 30 years ago. Second best time today. We need to, you know, we need to break up this system that perpetuates candidates like Hillary and Trump. Else we might be in the very same situation in 4 years.
I largely agree. I think that it is important for third parties to do things like build voter databases to sort of build outreach and build party infrastructure before elections. But in reality, this often doesn't happen, especially in American politics, because of the apathy of the American voter. And I think part of this problem is most Americans are dissatisfied with the Democrats and the Republicans, but they are so dissatisfied and so apathetic that they don't tune into processes to help build these parties up early on. So I think that it's important that when we have these opportunities, when people are paying attention, that we use them to really build the party. And I don't think that parties just are like pop up out of nowhere, right? Like absent of an election cycle, absent of big like news coverage, there isn't an effective way for people really to hear about third party like politics, about alternative options outside of the status quo.
I have a few questions for Mr. Johnson.
What up, Felipe?
It's interesting for you to advocate so strongly on behalf of third parties, but if you do truly believe the libertarian stigma and ideology, why are you quoting Marco Rubio in your responses, and why do you select a running mate who's also been a Republican governor? Are you truly libertarian in nature, or are you just disgruntled Republican who couldn't find an outlet within the Republican Party? And second of all, as a follow-up to the previous question that was asked, if you truly believe that parties are a thing that takes time and that you need to develop. You ran in 2012 and got 1% of the vote. What have you done these past 4 years to develop a groundwork instead of just blaming the low favorability ratings of Mr. Trump and Ms. Clinton? What have you done that has enabled the party to grow slowly and to change it from just your 2012 campaign?
That is quite the questions. First question on why am I quoting people like Marco Rubio or picking William Weld to be my campaign's vice president. I think just because you have a certain political ID or a badge that doesn't exclude you from having good ideas. And that doesn't exclude you from making sound policy. Like, there were times when I agreed with things that both Ms. Clinton and Mr. Trump said, and I said as much in that speech. But what distinguishes the Libertarian Party from any of the other parties sitting up here today is that we believe in limited government because we believe that you as an individual are the best person in deciding what maximizes your preferences and what you want to do with your life. The federal government should not stand in the way of that. That is what crafts libertarian. That is what crafts my political worldview. On your second question, as to what I, as Gary Johnson, have done as over the last 4 years that has furthered my campaign, is first of all, I think it's kind of insulting to say that just because you didn't get a lot of votes means you're therefore a bad candidate or an inferior candidate who doesn't deserve another shot. I mean, Ronald Reagan in 1972 didn't get a lot of votes either, but he made a fantastic president in 1980. That said, I mean, okay, people are going to disagree with me, whatever. The idea here is that, first of all, you don't judge a candidate's legitimacy based off of how many votes they're getting. And second of all is we've all continued to, be plugged in to the issues that have, surrounded Washington, D.C. And by coming up with new policies, new proposals, working across the aisle, as I managed to do as governor, well, not I, but we managed to do as governor of New Mexico, what you see is that by perpetually evolving a libertarian stance and saying, how does this look in 2016? How do we take the philosophy that our founding fathers fought and died for in the 18th century? How do we take that and make it work in the 21st century is an ongoing process. And I think it's something that we'll continue to see over a Johnson presidency over 4, hopefully 8 years, as new issues present themselves on a daily basis. And I think that it's something that we could look forward to from any libertarian candidate.
Hi, my question is for Shyok. I think a lot of voters are confused about Hillary Clinton's stance on free trade, and I don't think that's their fault. Hillary Clinton is really seeming to allow people to project what they believe about free trade onto her. I'm explicitly referring to the WikiLeaks documents where she talks about a hemisphere with free trade and open borders. So if you could, would you just tell us, not in relation to TPP, but what Hillary Clinton believes about free trade, and not her public or private positions on those, but what she'll actually act on as president? Thank you.
Hello. Okay. So, I mean, speaking of Shyok, quite frankly, I never believed that, she didn't like the TPP and she's against all this free trade stuff and all that kind of thing. Like, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, she is generally pretty supportive of free trade, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I think the way that it's been portrayed in this election, particularly, Donald Trump has said, oh, NAFTA is the single worst job killer in our that we've ever, a single worst job killer in terms of economic deal in our history and this kind of thing, and that isn't true. Like, the Congressional Research Service came out, said it had like a modest effect on the economy at best. Free trade has been shown again and again to have massive economic benefits, particularly for American consumers. So yeah, I mean, I like what I think she's gonna do. Yeah, she'll probably be generally pretty okay with free trade. I mean, maybe it'll be a little less politically popular, so she won't be out there with it all the way, but she is a pro-free trade politician. Yeah.
I think in just a short response to that, I think that Trump to answer that question would quote our president and say that Clinton will do anything and say anything to get elected, or to paraphrase. So I think that perception is definitely harming her to even provoke you to ask that question. I think that's a fundamental perception that's definitely inhibiting her genuineness.
It is Thursday, so TBT right now. There was a hashtag on Twitter trending that was "Which Hillary?" and it showed video footage of Hillary Clinton standing on both sides of many, many political issues. We don't know which Hillary we're getting if we vote for her for office. We don't know when you put, when you put the tea bag in the hot water, what ends up coming out. We don't know what policies she truly supports when the rubber meets the road. What that looks like is uncertainty going into the Clinton presidency, that if you're planning on voting for Hillary Clinton, don't know what you're getting. She stood on both sides of countless political issues, and that frightens me.
I'll just add that I think one of the
bandwagon.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that Hillary is switched these positions during the campaign was because of the candidacy of Bernie Sanders. And I think one of the reasons this is important is it shows that when Clinton was in positions of power as First Lady, as Senator, and a Secretary of State, she did push hardline free trade, neoliberal policies around the world, and this did hurt a lot of people. And the populist anger because of that has manifested itself in Bernie's campaign, in support for Stein, in support for even for Gary Johnson, for Trump. All of this, I think, is because of the failures previously of the Clinton administration. So I think now just being ambiguous about whether or not she supports free trade, jumping on the bandwagon, it's really dangerous to think that it's some sort of ambiguous position when she has in the past committed to policies that we know haven't worked for all Americans. And likely when she is in power and is no longer beholden to the will of the public in the same way that she is right now, I think she will continue to promote backroom deals about implementing her private positions over her public positions. And I think that that track record has shown that it's failed like robustly.
Address the idea that Clinton is you don't know what you're getting and this kind of thing. There has been a rule. I mean, certainly Clinton has not been as steadfast as somebody like Bernie Sanders. He's been saying the same thing since the 80s or what have you. But I think it's also easy for somebody like Bernie Sanders to say what he's been saying because he's from Vermont and he's only had to appeal to that constituency. And Hillary Clinton has had to appeal to she had to appeal to as diverse constituencies as New York. She's been on the national level for a long time. She's been in the South, et cetera. And what you see in regards to her pattern in terms of how she's been moving, she's moved with the Democratic Party, she's evolved with the Democratic Party, and she's stayed consistently on the liberal wing. And so as the majority of Democrats basically, they begin to come to a certain position, she tends to move with them. And I don't think that's necessarily a sign of her lack of principle or something like that, because she's always been committed fundamentally to progressive policies and liberal policies. And why shouldn't a politician reflect their constituents? Why shouldn't they do that? So I think the idea that we don't know what we're going to get is overblown. She's shown herself consistently to be a Democrat, and so what Democrats want is what we will get.
Can I add just one quick thing? I think this idea that Clinton evolves with the Democratic Party is kind of naive in terms of the effect that Clinton, as the leader of the Democratic Party, has on the policies that the Democrats have passed. And I think furthermore, Clinton has been disaligned with the Democratic Party on several issues. She is more corporatist than the rest of the Democratic Party. She is a warmonger more so than the rest of the Democratic Party. So this notion that she's just the same as any other Democrat and is changing with the times is just false. She has adapted some positions to meet popular demands, but that doesn't mean that she has evolved every position to meet those demands, and often may steer the country in a direction that we don't want it to go in.
I think we have time for one more question.
I just pose a quick question to Hillary Clinton. I think it'd be interesting to know if you really have evolved with the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. I would ask yourself that in 1964 when you're campaigning for Barry Goldwater. But I would also ask that where are you from? I think you tout a message that your father was a working class man from Chicago. Then you tout your time as First Lady of Arkansas. Sometimes you put on a Southern accent in most notably in your 2008 campaign and in previous times. Then in 2000 you run for the New York Senate because it's most politically viable. All of this does not seem to reflect the constituents. It seems to reflect your own political ambitions and your desire to please yourself at the end of the day. So I'd really like to know answers to those questions, if you could.
Okay, so in regards to Barry Goldwater, yes, she was a Goldwater girl in high school. If you have never shifted any of your political positions since high school, then great on, that's awesome. But no, yes, she underwent a serious political change at Wellesley. She was a staunch Johnson supporter after that. Worked for the McGovern campaign. She's been liberal ever since. Now, in regards to her, where she's from and these issues of, okay, and I'm gonna get off the whole Clinton defend anything stance here. Like I personally, I've been a Clinton supporter from the beginning, but it's no secret that she is someone who is politically expedient. She could do that. Certainly, she can do the weird Southern accent stuff. Certainly, she can do I'm your abuelita and that stuff. But I don't think that undercuts the fundamental way that she has operated and the policy focus that she brings to the table, the experience that she brings to the table, the fact that she has consistently pushed again for fundamentally pro-social justice policies. And yes, there have been certain things that she could have moved on earlier and that kind of thing, but fundamentally speaking, she is still a Democrat, and yes, okay, she's more interventionist than certain, other figures, but it's not like she's the only one. I don't think she's like, reflective of a single, like the Hillary Clinton constituency on foreign policy. Like she operates, she's still a part of the spectrum of the Democratic Party. So, and again, fundamentally, you will see with all of her positions, she's tied to very much, the liberal kind of establishment wing of the party. And she won't do anything that's seriously outside of that circle.
I'll just add like one last thing. I think even if we grant this notion that Hillary Clinton will stick sort of within the bounds of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, the liberal wing of the Democratic Party has meant a lot of things over the years and it has changed quite a bit. They deregulation policies were the status quo of the Democratic Party in the 1990s. So I think that like this idea that like we know what we're getting with Clinton because she's like in line with like part of the party that is not really democratic and doesn't always reflect the will of the populist or like populist demand is like equally problematic.
Right. Having a candidate be beholden to whatever the political party wants is reckless and dangerous at its very core. We don't want someone who is controlled by special interest groups. We don't want someone who is controlled by their party's caucuses with their diverse interests and the money that, outlines and highlights those interests. We want candidates who are principled and stick to their guns. The same arguments, whether it be for gay marriage, for gun control, for abortion, you name it, these arguments have existed for decades, and yet now is their time to change your mind when you're in your 60s and 70s? That's unwholesome. We don't know what she's going to change her mind on in the next 4 or 8 years to come, and it's a dangerous proposition to vote for Hillary Clinton in this election.
That's all the questions we have. That is the end of our debate. Thank you so much to the debaters for coming. You guys all did a great job. Thank you all for coming to the event. And that's all. Thank you.